So thank you everyone for coming. And we're really happy to have Louise here today to talk to us about her book, Alfred, about her father's experiences during World War II and how she came to write it. And I know that you were a math teacher and you were a little nervous about writing at first because you thought you were using the wrong side of the brain for creative writing, but you did a great job. And I thank you for coming here and telling us about it. So without further ado, can you give us your presentation?
Okay.
Tell us something about the book. And as I say, if anyone has questions, just type them in the chat.
Okay. My name is Louise Endres Moore, and I wrote a book about what my father did in World War II. It's called Alfred, The Quiet History of a World War II Infantryman. I didn't really expect to write a book. I thought I would put together about 10 to 20 pages that I would pass to relatives, to my siblings and grandkids, my dad's grandkids, and then other relatives. But the 10 to 20 pages turned into something far greater. When I first started, I thought this is what I was using. This is the story of the 320th Infantry, and that's a regimental book. And I thought if I wanted to figure out what my dad had done, how difficult could that be when the book is so small and it's thin? There's not much to it. I thought it would be relatively easy, but it wasn't. So what happened is that I kind of entered a rabbit hole, and I was in the rabbit hole for about 17 years, and then I said enough, and I crawled back out. It was difficult, partly because my father had difficulty talking about the war, and there were times when I actually got a little upset about how long it took me. It made me almost a little weepy to think I'd spent so much time on a book. And then once I saw an Olympian, climb his little stand, and he said, "This has been 16 years in the making." And I thought, okay, that makes me feel better. I told my publisher no one should spend 17 years on anything except a child. And she said, a book is a child. So, but anyway, one of the things about the 17 years is that if it hadn't taken that long, I may not have found Bob Esser. I found Bob Esser after about 14 years, and he was important to me. I didn't even meet him, but his family. He had Alzheimer's by the time I found him, but I found his family. So Bob Esser, the way that I found him is that my brother was in charge of the bricks being ordered for a small military memorial in Dane. And he got a brick from this, I think it was H. Robert Esser. And it said he had been part of the Lost Battalion at Mortain. And my brother emailed me and said, "Do you see, what do you think? This could be interesting. Do you want to contact the family?" And that is how I found him. Anyway, I will talk more about Mortain. However, it's a significant battle. And I realized even after I wrote the book that my dad never said anything about Mortain except the word. And by finding Bob Esser, he had talked to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So he had an interview. His daughter gave that to me, and it completed a story. It personalized a story. But I'll explain that more when we have a map later. Okay, so I would like to show you just a little bit about, a little bit about the cover of the book. The cover of the book came from this small picture. It's like 2 by 3 inches. And I believe it's in the Vosges Mountains after the Battle of the Bulge. When I asked Dad what was the worst part of the war for him, he said the Battle of the Bulge. So when I look at this picture, sometimes I'm surprised how comfortable he looks. And relaxed. But what it is that you can see the snow down below. They're in 8 to 10 inches of snow. They're sleeping in the ground, and artillery is flying overhead. And they're happy. I mean, that doesn't sound the greatest, but they're happy in those conditions. And the reason they're happy is that no one's trying to kill them 24 hours a day, and they know the artillery is going beyond them and they're not the target. Also, the foxholes had been built by Germans who had more time to build foxholes. The Americans tended to build a foxhole and move the next day, or they started and then they had to move, and they just didn't have much time to build a good foxhole. So the foxholes in the Bulge Mountains at this time of this picture, they were big enough for 2 men to lie down, and they had many times logs over the top to keep some of the snow out. So like I said, you wouldn't expect that to be great conditions, but it was for these men. Okay, the man obviously is my father. What I found interesting, even after we chose the picture, is that the shadow of his face looks very similar to what that's how I think of him later in life. The shadow looks to me like him. So that was interesting. The signature is his own handwriting off of medical paper. So that's his own signature. I called it the quiet history because he had trouble talking about all of it. And another thing about it, oh, he's wearing a watch. And from the shape of the watch, I think I found that in his army trunk and I made it into a Christmas ornament a year ago. One other thing is, well, his clothing's different too. I think he might have become more of a translator at this time. But because he's wearing a sweater and it looks like maybe wool pants. I don't know. I'm not sure. But it doesn't look as much like combat. But nobody was doing combat right then. Anyway, I made the watch into an ornament. And also, it's hard for you probably to see, but he is wearing his wedding ring. And I don't think that would have been common in combat to wear the wedding ring. What I believe is that by this time, he was feeling more confident that he would make it home to see his wife and to meet his 4.5-month-old daughter that was born while he was there. On the day that he found out his daughter had been born, it was a pretty intense day. And I have a feeling from conversation, a little bit of conversation with him, which is in the book, that he didn't expect to meet that child. So anyway, that gives a little background of the cover of the book. I think there were certain things that had to happen in order for this story to evolve. And it's hard to say this in a polite way, but my mother passed away, and I think that needed to happen. And I think it needed to happen. I've thought about this again after writing the book. I'm not sure if my dad was protecting my mother or if my mother was protecting my father. But we didn't know anything. We didn't know much about the war. And even now, we think my mother passed away without knowing much of anything. Before my dad came home, the government sent letters to the spouses and the parents of the soldiers and said, don't ask questions. And my mother would have been a person to honor that. She knew that he came home a different person. And she told me once war was hard on him. But I think she was a very supportive person. She was strong. She'd been alone, for a while. And she just supported him and therefore in a way kind of protected him. Let me think, I have some notes here. We only knew that he had been a barber, a chauffeur, and a translator. That's all that we knew. He had never talked about anything else. So a barber, a chauffeur, and a translator. He was in his 80s when we realized he had been a heavy weapons machine gunner. And that's the part that's painful. So I'm not into weaponry. Some of you might understand this definitely more than I do. A heavy weapon machine gun, let's say a normal machine gun is this big around, the barrel of it. A heavy weapon is more like that because there's a sleeve of water surrounding the barrel so that it can shoot longer and it doesn't overheat. And my dad said it was heavy, but he could carry, it was heavy, but you could carry it. Whereas, and that was a 30 caliber. Again, I'm just saying things. No understanding of 30 caliber versus 50. But a 50 caliber machine gun was larger and had to be mounted on a Jeep or in a plane or whatever. That's when that could not be carried. So that gives you an idea of what we're talking about when I say heavy weapons machine gun. So my mother passed away, and within 6 months, my dad broke a hip. For rehab, he went to the Good Samaritan Center in Lodi, Wisconsin for rehab, but he never learned to walk again. And maybe it was possibly a couple strokes that he had that kind of cut the connection between his brain and his feet, but he never learned to walk again. So his entire life changed in 6 months. He loses his wife. He has to leave his farm. He was a farmer, and he putzed around on the farm all the time. Suddenly his wife was gone. He was in a nursing home. He couldn't putz around on the farm. And when we realized that he was going to be at the nursing home for a while, I said to my siblings, I'll do Saturdays. So I didn't go every Saturday, but for the majority of them, if anyone else was going to be around, I tended not to go. I would go when it was me or nothing, kind of. If he didn't have an option of somebody else to distract him, I definitely was there. I live in Cedarburg, so it takes about 2 hours, a little bit less, to get to Lodi, and then 2 hours back. So I hung around for about 4 hours because, as Laura said, I was a math teacher, and that's my little formula. You stay someplace at least as long as you have to drive to get there and back home. When, I was going to say, it wasn't like conversation flowed from my father. It wasn't like I went there and he talked for a long time about the war, but it gave me a chance to repeatedly have him to myself and to ask a simple question. I usually tried to make it objective. So one week I read about how a particular soldier said he could never eat fruit cocktail after the war. And so I thought, okay, there's a question. So I went the next Saturday and I said to Dad, how do you feel about fruit cocktail? And he said, it's okay. And that was the end of the conversation for that week about war. But I was naive. I was naive at that time. Here is a K ration. And it's kind of like, and it almost looks bigger here, but it's a little bit like a Cracker Jacks box, maybe a little bit bigger. This is what my dad ate a lot of. And within this was another container. And this one is coated in wax so you could burn it and you could heat something up. Inside this, just to give you an idea of what they were eating. What I'm doing this for is to say he wasn't eating fruit cocktail, because I think fruit cocktail was more of a rear echelon food. They probably came in those big number 10 cans or whatever, they're like gallon cans. They probably got them way too often for every meal. But in a box like this, I don't think there's any fruit. I believe this took up, what I'm going to show you, took up half of it. And on the other side, there was probably some kind of can of like Spam and hash. Hash wasn't very popular, or something like that. So there wasn't room for fruit. He wasn't getting fruit. Okay, I'll just tell you about this a little bit. Okay, this is a cracker. This is bouillon powder, and this is gum. On the back side, this is a chocolate candy bar on top. This is toilet paper from Scott Paper. It's a little piece of it, wad of it. And then I suspect there were cigarettes on the bottom. It looks like there could have been 2 cigarettes in there, maybe more. I don't know. That was a hot commodity. If you didn't smoke, you could trade them for things. So cigarettes were kind of a desirable thing. But anyway, I'm showing you what he most commonly ate, and there wasn't fruit cocktail in there. Another thing that I did was on my way to Lodi, I would listen to Andy Rooney's My War. I would listen to it as an audible. And that's when I started to realize what my dad had experienced, something that we had no clue about. And it made me teary-eyed. And even now, if I think about Andy Rooney's audible, the thing that I think about, or the image that I get, is dead bodies hanging on fences. For whatever reason, he mentioned that, and that's what I think of from that audible. But it made me understand what my dad had gone through. So I let's say I went for 5 years to see my dad. I never expected him to, I didn't think he would survive 5.5 years of restriction because he was a pretty independent man. But he did tell a neighbor of ours that being in war made a nursing home look pretty good, but it wasn't bad. Anyway, for 5 years, I went to see him. I thought I had most of the story. I nominated him for a French Legion of Honor, which is kind of a big deal. Eisenhower got it. Steven Spielberg has gotten it. You know, it's kind of a big deal, but I don't want to make it, he definitely deserved it. But there's people, you have to live for 60 years after the war. They didn't start giving them to veterans until 60 years after the war. So you have to live that long. Anyone in the Pacific wouldn't get it because they didn't serve in France. You had to be in certain campaigns. You probably had to have certain, they were probably looking for certain things on, you had to be, I'm sure you have to have a combat infantry badge, those kinds of things. But after that, my dad realized that we didn't know something. And so about 2 months after the French Legion of Honor, when I thought I was done, I was like, you know what, that was a pretty good day. It wasn't perfect. He wasn't thrilled, but it was a pretty good day. But about 2 months later, all of a sudden, like in 5 or 6 minutes, all this verbiage came out. And part of it was dead bodies floating in water. And I didn't know what that meant. I thought it was a river crossing because he had done 10 river crossings, or his group. Sometimes if I say he, I mean his unit, had done 10 river crossings. And so I thought that was a possibility. And then I went home. So that was a Saturday. I went home and, you know, just family things on Sunday. Now I'm going to go back to, okay. So on Monday, for whatever reason, I look at this envelope. And this envelope I had had forever, but do you see how many addresses really are on here? Like for how, I think there's 10. I have them listed in order in my book so that you can see the dates and how that moved. Okay, my grandmother, Mrs. Nick Miller from Roxbury, sent it on May 4th, 1944. And I think they found him in September. Like this says, I think September 14th of 44. So it took, you know, like to June, July, August, it took him 4 months, 4.5 months almost to find him. But I didn't think that was a big deal. Number one, the envelope was a mess. I didn't understand any of it. The other thing is, do you see how over here it says 325? Well, his regiment was a 320th. And if it's 325, it's only one digit off, and there's 16 million people involved in World War II. Again, here it's 325. I think this is probably where I looked at it the most because that was the first piece, the first address change. But on that day, on that Monday, I just put it's INF 325, GLDR, INF, RGT, which is probably regiment. I just, you know, put it into the computer, and what came up, I was just like, how did I miss that? How could I have missed that? And it was shocking to me actually, but what it came up is the 325th Glider Infantry is attached to the 82nd Airborne. And the 82nd Airborne dropped people in behind the beaches before D-Day so that there'd be boots on the ground. Okay, I was pretty certain my dad had not been a glider. I think we would have known something about that. But this was Monday and I couldn't wait till Saturday to go ask my dad about that. So I called him and I said, well, I also knew that the 325th, I think, I don't know if I knew it that day, had an amphibious portion. So I called him and I said, Dad, you didn't do D-Day, did you? And he said, no. And that's all he would have said. I mean, that's how little he talked about things. He said, no. And then I said, when did you go? And he goes, he couldn't say THs. So he said, the day after. Well, I was on the phone and I said, did you go by boat? And he goes, yeah. I said, with equipment or men? He said, men. And and he wasn't going to tell me more. And so I started talking about birds and squirrels and stuff, so that he wasn't just thinking about the war when I left him. But that really, it was, what do I want to say? I felt badly about it because at the French Legion of Honor, I was the one that summarized his tour of duty. And I never wanted to exaggerate anything. So I stood in front of 100 people, 2 TV cameras, and the Lodi Enterprise newspaper, and said he was not involved in D-Day, but arrived in July of 1944. The reason I said that is that's what the 35th Division did. But I think that day his face was very blank. Again, there's a little chunk of this in the book. His face was very blank, and someone from the Chicago consulate came up to me and said, "Does he understand?" And I said, "Oh yeah, he's fine cognitively, he just can't walk." But when I watched the video of the day, I could see why she asked the question, because I've seen pictures of people receiving the French Legion of Honor, and they're usually maybe proud, happy, something, and it was blank. And I think he felt, well, I know he felt, they're giving me this big medal and they don't even know what I did. And at one point, like 2 months later, again, there's research and I don't ask things every week. I have to get a grip on what I'm talking about. I said to him, "So Dad, you did D-Day +1. And he said, "Day said I didn't." And I said, "Dad, that was me." You know, he could blame the French. He did not want to blame his daughter. But anyway, so down here on these addresses, I mean, they're looking all over. And the one, like this one down in the corner is the 320th. It says no records in Company C. Company C is scratched off there and a D is written. And he was in Company D of the 320th. I'm surprised any of this could get to him. The other thing that's kind of important is right here. This looks like Company U. And whenever the companies are written, I have to think, it might go from Company A to, I'll say M, but it could be P or whatever. If it's beyond there, it means your replacement. Okay, I didn't know that at the time, but anyway. Okay, so I tried to find out. I went to Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg is in charge of the 82nd Airborne. So I didn't go to Fort Bragg. I contacted Fort Bragg. And first it was email, and then I was going to talk to someone. And he asked me on the phone, "When did your father arrive in Europe from the United States?" And I knew it could be a problem. I knew it was a little bit late. So I said, June 2nd. And he said, "It's not possible. There's no way they could get him into position between June 2nd and June 7th. There's not enough time. You have thousands of guys, of soldiers. They're disembarking from a ship. They have to be processed. They had to get him, he was actually in Wales. They had to get him down to the southern coast of England, process them, put them on ships or put them in boats again, and then take them out into the channel and all of that." And they said it wasn't possible. So they quit talking to me. And I always felt it was a little bit like Home Alone. I don't know if you remember that movie where the mother's looking for her son and she'd call social services and they'd kind of pick up the phone or whatever and say, "Crazy on line 2, like don't answer it." And they did kind of quit. They didn't answer my phone calls and they wouldn't answer my emails. And it was because they felt I was exaggerating and my dad was wrong. So I went to the 35th Division. I asked a question on their email site that didn't go well either. And it didn't go well because, again, people thought he was exaggerating or lying, or I was confused, or I was looking to glorify him, whatever. That didn't go well either. So I was on my own, and it's hard to figure things out. But what I knew is that my dad had a friend named Albert Simon, and he was from the same location as my dad. And I thought he had gone to Europe with my dad. And I had a feeling that Albert, I might have known he might have done D-Day. I don't know if I knew that or not, but I did know that he died by suicide in about 1967. And everyone says he was a wonderful person. He was 38 years old when he landed on, well, I'm jumping ahead, but he was 38 years old when he went to Europe. So what I did is I found a lady in Madison at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum that he never married, never had children. And that's usually how you get discharge papers. So I found a lady in Madison that she'd be willing to take a request from a niece. And that niece was my first cousin. So I contacted her. It was Marjorie Simon. Contacted her and said, will you do this right away? You have to write it. You have to sign your name. This is the address. This is the person. And Fort Bragg could have gotten this for me, I bet, in 30 seconds. But it took about 3 months. I got the discharge papers from Marjorie. He arrived on the same day, June 2nd, but he had something my dad didn't have, and that was a bronze arrowhead. And a bronze arrow, it was listed on the paper in awards. And a bronze arrowhead is for an assault landing, and that's for D-Day. So for Albert Simon, he went with my dad. He got thrown in, whatever, assigned to the 29th Infantry, and he stayed with the 29th Infantry. So his records are more straightforward, more complete. I have found him online in the 29th Division website. So what that shows, I could never show, even after 17 years, I could not prove that my dad did D-Day +1, but I proved it was possible because he had an extra day to do exactly what he did, because Albert Simon had been on the beaches on D-Day itself. So that's kind of, and I did ask a man, I had 2 men read my book, and they both had 400 books on World War II. And this one man, I emailed him and I told him what was happening and all of that. And he wrote back and he said, I would have said the same thing as Fort Bragg. It wasn't enough time to get him there. And then he said, and there's a word for that, and it's a word I do not like to type, but it's cannon fodder. Those 2 soldiers hadn't been trained for assault landings, although I don't think it mattered, but they were truly rushing them to get there so they could throw them on the beach and say whatever, it was the same for everybody. Omaha Beach was a mess. They had never been able to clear anything out before the day. So everything was intact. But anyway, so that was just the beginning of my dad's service. And what I realized is he was a replacement. So he trained with one group, went to Europe with another group, was thrown in with some group for June, served with the 35th and came home with the 63rd. And again, all in the book. But I thought that when I had this book, initially I thought he trained with this group, went to Europe with this group, served with the group, came home with the group. And that wasn't anything. That is not the case. So that's why some of it's difficult to do. So he was in 5 campaigns. A campaign is like a mission to cross the Rhine or something. And 5 campaigns, 1,600 combat miles. It's a lot. A lot of it was walking, actually, for an infantryman. And a lot of it was under Patton. Some of the things that made me stay with this for writing the book is that very early on, I went to a 50th birthday party, and somebody says, well, how are you doing, Louise? What you up to? And I said, I am, I'm researching World War II for what my dad did. And I mentioned that he was pained about it all. And the hostess of that party said to me, oh, I have a theory about that. Some can take it and some can't. And I didn't like to hear that. I didn't like to hear it from my dad. I don't like to hear about it for anybody. And I knew my dad, and I was like, if it was painful for him, I needed to kind of figure out what that was that he had done. And there were comments like that. There's a lot of people that really don't understand anything. And I didn't either. I have to admit that. I mean, I had to learn. I knew my dad didn't like war. I even think from the time I was born, I knew that. I never remember learning it. It's just this part of me. We knew my dad didn't like war. But what was I going to say? Oh, another thing that was somewhat like that, some can take it, some can't. A man at my dad's table at the nursing home, on the day that I told the table, I never ate with him. I just got there during lunch, chatted, and then I spent time with Dad. On the day I told the table that my dad was going to get a French Legion of Honor for what he had done in World War II, one of the men said, "Oh, I always wanted to be in the war, a Fraulein on each arm." And again, it's like, that's not what my dad did. And I looked at him, I watched him, he had no expression, nothing, I didn't see anything. But when I took him to his room, just before we turned to go into the door, he said something and I asked him to repeat it. And he said, and again, he spoke German until he went to school, but he said, this is kind of his voice. "Well, maybe it's good I touched war. At least I know what it is." And that was his comment about what had been said at the table. But again, the whole thing about having it dismissed like that. So my book is about the reality of war. My dad would want it that way. He wouldn't want the heroics of it. It's reality. He didn't say a lot, but I could piece together from other people. And also, this is one of my books that I had. This is the symbol for the 35th Division, which one of my 94-year-old boyfriend gave me that. That's what I called Robert Phillips from Georgia. But anyway, that's from his group. And this is a journal. So that was nice. I got a lot of information from that. And then this is another one of a different regiment, but within the same group. And I mean, I had lots of other books, but these journals, these were lovely because it was day by day. I want you to know there's no created dialogue. Somebody wanted me to write it as a historical fiction. I was like, no, I'm writing what my dad did. I'm not, and also I'm a math teacher and I'm not all that creative. So the book is, the book is just reality. And it's not really just for World War II, it's for any infantryman. And I've had Vietnam vets read it, and somewhat grateful in the sense that they never realized that someone from World War II would feel about war kind of how they did. This is just one example of, it was a Vietnam vet. My brother was in a bar. The bartender was a Vietnam vet. My brother also had been in Vietnam. Not a terrible assignment though, but bad enough. And he said to the Vietnam vet something about a book. And the bartender said he didn't want a book or he didn't want anything about Vietnam. He went and waited on another person and came back and said to my brother, "Sometimes I think those that died over there, they were the lucky ones." And the reason for that is because if you make it home alive, nobody understands what you've been through. And what I call it is the struggle to survival. So they survived the war, which is good, but then they still have to survive that survival and what they have seen. When I started, World War II vets were up here. They could do no wrong. There were 16 million heroes. Nobody did anything wrong. And Vietnam vets, I had somebody tell me that they were whiners. And I don't believe that for a second. Once you're in war, it doesn't matter what the reason is or how much support you have. It's all the same. In fact, one of the people, and I forget which one, if it was Robert Phillips, somebody said they called war same thing, different faces. So anyway, but I don't want you to think that everything about the book is like kind of, there's pleasurable things, and there's pleasurable things that happened with me researching, and there's pleasurable things in the book. Okay, for one of them, and this actually is not much, this is not in the book much, you'll recognize it, but I didn't say much because it almost seemed like it was more about me than Dad. We knew, okay, here's a ring. This ring says in French, I had to be told that, more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. My dad got this from a man in Metz, France, and he had given his fruit and chocolate army rations to this man to give to his kids for Christmas, because the man managed the bathhouse, and that's where all the guys took showers. And he confided in them that he had nothing to give to his kids. So my dad and his friend Ben Lane gave fruit and chocolate to the father. They took it over quickly and quietly on Christmas Eve and left. And the father the man that they gave it to had tears in his eyes and said, "I'll see you when you come back from battle." He knew they were going up, that there was something big going on up north. He knew they were being sent up there. And when they came back, that's when he gave him the ring. Okay, so I'm going to show you. Oops. Okay, this is in the back of the book, this book, the 320th, the last 2 pages. And these are guys that signed their names before they separated and went different ways. I found Louis Gogel's daughter. I found Ned Johnson's wife and daughter, and basically no one else except Ben Lane down here on the bottom. And I found Ben Lane because he was raised in Houstontown, Pennsylvania. He returned there, and it's a town of 1,200 people. And so it was relatively, that was easy, much better than some of these bigger cities to try to find an address. And it was easier in 2002 to find addresses because everybody had landlines. But anyway, I wrote him a letter, and he called me back and he said, "I've been thinking about your father. I loved him like a brother. I was with him for Christmas 1944. And I was like, I knew the story. So that had to do, he's the man. Ben Lane is the one who gave the fruit and chocolate to the manager of the bathhouse to give to his kids. Okay, so I knew that was kind of a good story. Another, just before I leave this sheet, this slide, the last 4 addresses actually are my dad's writing. I know that. And I suspect that Johnny Majerzik was from Chicago, but his dad lived in Grand March. And my dad thought that maybe someday he'd get to meet him. But none of these guys ever spoke again. After none of these, there were a couple, there was one from training where my parents visited, but they never spoke again. They never got together. Not with my dad anyway. But, and then there's my dad, like when he said he did something, I knew he did it. Like some people thought that maybe he lied or he was exaggerating, but he was a guy who knew exactly who he was. He accepted who he was. He never put anyone down. He never tried to inflate his ego. He never did any of that. So, this is one example of how he didn't inflate his ego. He said to me about the fruit and chocolate, and of his friend, Ben Lane, he said, "Well, it was really more his idea than mine." Kind of like, I'm not going to take credit that I'm a saint. Ben wanted to do it and I went along with it. But anyway, what I wanted to do then with this situation, we wanted to get Ben and Dad together for a reunion, and it didn't work. Ben was unrealistic. And he wanted, he was going to take a bus on oxygen and go to St. Louis from Pennsylvania. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. And it wasn't. I called his daughter and she said, no, he was in the hospital last week. And I said to Dad, if you can't see Ben, do you still want to go to the reunion? And he said, no. So I was trying to find something pleasant. So what I decided to do was to find the man in Metz, France, because he had been a manager of the bathhouse, but my dad had said he came to the United States to swim. And I thought, how many people could that be in 1944? So I went to the Swimmers Hall of Fame in Florida, emailed, found. They sent me to the French Hall of Fame. They were into it. They said, we're gonna help you. They sent it up to the elders in Metz and, or Lorraine, I can't remember. And within 8 days, they came back with an email that said, I think we found our man. So I wrote a letter to that guy, had to translate it to French. He wrote me a letter, had to translate it to English, blah, blah, blah. And then we gave the 2 soldiers chocolate and fruit for that Christmas. And it was the only Christmas I could have done that because I didn't have Ben Lane in Christmas 2001. And by 2003, he had passed away. So it was perfect. That was quite lovely. The French Legion of Honor was a good day. Like I said before, we had 100 people, and it was a party for my dad. And I had said to him, you didn't think that much of the medal, but you enjoyed the party, and that's the way it was. We served Calvados in little medicine cups. Calvados is apple brandy that they found in the basements of houses. And it was Don May and my dad. One said you could put it in cigarette lighters. It was so strong. And the other person said, heck, you could run a Jeep on it. So it was very strong. I wrote more about that too. Okay, then I'll go back. And I know I try to get through everything, and I will. Okay, this is a video that I accidentally found. Somebody sent it through the 35th Division website. And, okay, so somebody sent it through the 35th Division website. There were a bunch of them. There were a bunch of videos. One was called Mud. And I knew that it had been muddy in the Gramercy Forest, so I decided to click on that one. And it only, do you see how this truck is trying to stay on a road and it can't? It's sliding into the ditch and it's all just muck. Some people described it like pea soup. But anyway, I clicked on Mud, and it really only takes like 1 minute and 10 seconds to get to somebody that I think is important. Here, there's sloshing water. I know the quality of this, but I mean, we're talking 1944. So a lot of water just slushing out of the ruts of the tires. And this man is going to get out of his Jeep. And then at some point, it just switches over to two guys approaching a foxhole. And when I saw that, when I saw the two guys approaching the foxhole, I didn't see anything initially. Okay, so there they are. I think it's funny, they wipe their feet to go into a dirt foxhole, but they're trying to keep their foxhole clean. So I get to this, and I go back and forth, 10 to 15 times. And I'm looking at this man right here, and I go, man, I think that's my dad. 16 million guys. And I'm looking, and I think that's him. I found this after he had passed away, which is a bummer, because I would have liked to have known where he got this car dashboard. I thought maybe it was a Jeep, but I had somebody tell me, no, that's a car. And I would have liked to have known the story. They're in a foxhole. This is a raincoat. So this would keep out some of the rain, and the raincoat would keep out some more. I thought it was my dad, relatively short. There's something about his wrists though. Like when I put my hand down on something, my wrist is lower than my knuckles, and my dad, his wrist is higher than his knuckles. And I knew there was a picture of that from like a wedding anniversary with my parents. But so, let me see here. Oh, I have to shrink this down and get rid of it. I'm sorry, there's a few things here that work. Okay. I don't want that either. This is what I want. Okay, so I got rid of the video. This is the picture kind of that I showed you. I used to work at Milwaukee Area Technical College, and someone down in the photography department, they call it grabbing a photo from a video. I never met her. Her name is Sue, and I've never met her. She was very kind to do this. After I had it, I sent it to, I had a friend, like he was in my dad's company, and he didn't think he knew my dad, but they're in the same company. I could call him anytime I wanted. I had 9 years of asking him questions and being his buddy. I used to call him my 94-year-old boyfriend. And I asked him, I sent this to him, and I called him and I said, Robert, who do you think is on the right-hand side of that foxhole? And he said immediately, Louis Gogol. A year later, he found this picture in his actual scrapbook. He didn't think he knew my dad, but you know how they always have those corners, those black corners? This is Endres, but he spelled it with an A. So, and it says German interpreter, and then Gogol, Munster. This is occupation. This is after the war. This is Louis Gogol from the photograph book. Robert said this was Louis Gogol. So those two guys are the same. This is my dad, and I believe that's my dad. However, you can't always prove that. This is another picture that I got after my dad had passed away. The daughter of the driver sent it. I looked at him and I was like, okay, I think he's driving these guys back to the front line because they don't look too happy. I look at him, I look behind him and I go, that's Griffiths. And I go over here and I go, that's my dad. Because he has a distinctive, Griffiths has a distinctive jawline. And here he is. And so my dad is with Griffiths in this picture on the right. And I believe that's him too. So, and I never found Griffiths. It's better to have an unusual name rather than a real common one. Okay, so what I was going to do, unless you want to take questions, I was going to go through very quickly, like one thing on each location. This is a map that I got from Keith Bullock, who is in the 35th Division in the 137th though Regiment. But it's hard to see the countries, and there's an extra line going back to the United States. So it's kind of like a little kid's project, and I colored it and got rid of the line. But I was going to say, this is the route that my dad did. So Omaha Beach, and there is so much to say. But what happened after I wrote the book and I had proved that it was possible that my dad did D-Day +1, a nephew out in Colorado called me, and he called me twice. But anyway, he called me, and one time he said, Weezy, I thought everybody knew about Omaha Beach. And what it was is that he had stayed at the farm with my dad for several weeks during the summer, and my dad had told him. And because he knew, he thought everyone knew that. But my dad had said there were body pieces and parts everywhere. So that's something, and that's not in the book because my nephew told me after we published. St. Lo, there was a church steeple standing, and the big thing about that is the smell. They said there were pigs, cows, dogs, and men all lying dead together, and it was June, maybe beginning of July. There's also hedgerows in this area, and the largest carpet bombing in the history of the world. But again, that's in the book. Okay, Mortain. Remember I said that I found that man after 14 years? Okay, this is kind of a quick synopsis of that battle. Okay, there's a big hill outside Mortain. Some call it hill, some call it mountain. I'm going to talk as if there's only two guys in this thing, but I'm talking about their units, and it was their battalions. Bob Esser's at the top. That's the best position to be in. You can see out in all directions. You can see the enemy. You can see your people. The Germans are surrounding him, trying to push him off. He was up there. He had one of these and one rabbit in 6 days. That's Bob Esser. He's trapped on the top. They're running out of food. People are dying. And they're running out of ammunition, everything. And my dad's group is told to cut through the Germans and rescue the people on the top. And this is where my dad said nothing but the word Mortain. So I have a whole book on Mortain, but I like the fact that I could get descriptions from the man at the top, and my dad was the man that cut through. Both of them got a Presidential Unit Citation, which is significant because that Presidential Unit Citation was the only one given, I have to make sure I get my units right, to any battalion of my dad's regiment for the entire war. There was no other time for another one. Then after they broke through Mortain, this part down here went pretty fast. There weren't as many Germans to hold them back. A lot of that's walking. When they got to Troy, there had been an orphanage had been hit by something, and there was a funeral for about 30 or 35 tiny caskets. You know that part. They went over here to the Gramercy Forest, which is where the National Archive video was taken. My sister was born during this time, during a bad part where, it was a bad part. I really think my dad didn't expect to get to see her. They got to go take a shower after 3 months in Nancy. So Nancy's a good memory because no one was trying to kill them and because they got a shower. And it might have even been warm. Then they went back to the Gramercy Forest. They were going to cross this river, but they got called up for the Battle of the Bulge. They went to Metz. That's where they give their fruit and chocolate. Then they went up to in the area of Villers-la-Bonneau, right south of Bastogne. Okay, for the Battle of the Bulge, at night it could be 10 to 20 degrees below zero. They were sleeping in foxholes. They couldn't light a fire to try to stay warm at night because then the enemy would see them. And my dad mentioned about having 5 days where all you'd eat are the candy bars, and they made you thirsty, and it was mostly protein. Then he was rushed, they were rushed down, well, they went back to Metz to pick up the ring. And they were rushed down to the Bulge Mountains to take the picture for the cover of the book. That was only about a week, but they were happy down there. And then they were rushed up, they liberated Venlo. They went somewhere in the area here. There was a barn where there were 600 bodies that were smoldering still when Dad's unit went through. Robert Phillips, the guy that I knew in Georgia, my boyfriend, had pictures from that. There were 600 in the barn, 400 in the ditch outside. I asked my dad toward the end of the war, I said, do you remember a burning barn toward the end of the war? And he said, no. And he said it really fast, which wasn't his style. And I had a picture from Robert and I held it up and my dad didn't look at it and he said, no. So I guess if he ever lied, I guess that's a lie. I'm sure he remembered it. He was like, I'm not going there. And then they met the Russians. We agreed to stop here and the Russians came from the other side. So my dad's units, they knew the war was over before anything was signed because the Russians were there and that was the end point. Okay, just a couple more things. This won't take long. Within the last months of Dad's life, I'd always say, goodbye, Dad, see you next week. And he'd say bye. And I left one day and I said, bye, Dad, see you next week. And just as I was in the doorway, he said, good luck. And I think that he never expected, he didn't really know what I was doing. He didn't know, but he wanted me to have whatever it was that I was working on. He would never have expected his photo to be on the cover of a book or his signature with his name, none of that. But he wanted for me whatever it was I wanted. And I've thought about what it would have been like had it been published when he was alive, and he wouldn't have liked it. That would have been a little embarrassing, I think. I don't believe he ever would have read it. I'm certain he wouldn't have. And I think that we would have put a sign on his door that said, Alfred does not want to talk about the book. Thank you. So that's the end of my part. If anyone has any questions. I know I said a lot, probably maybe too much, but it's hard for me to cut.
Well, Louise, we have 2 questions in the chat, and I guess if someone wants to ask a question,
Anything, yeah.
Unmute. But Chris writes, Louise, what you describe as writing seems like a love story to me. Can you accept that love can come out of the evils of war? And then she writes, also, Louise, as quiet as your dad was, and do you think your discussion about him, with him about the war, began a journey towards peace in his school?
Okay. Yeah, you know what? There's something going on with an extra sound for me.
Yeah, I hear
But
that.
that was more of a comment than a question. Is that right?
The second one, yes.
Okay.
I think I've muted people again so that we don't have that feedback. But go
Okay.
ahead.
A beautiful thing. Okay, in his unit. I see that from Diane. I have not seen the whole thing. I do feel, and I even, to be honest, there's more, there's tons. When you spend that much time doing it, one of the things was the 320th, they were a little bit of the underdog. Okay, I think I'm going to go to sharing the screen again, if that's okay. Because, oh, I shouldn't go there. There's too much. Okay, this is a screen. Before I started the book, I knew nothing. I didn't know a regiment from a battalion, from a platoon, nothing. And I had to figure out how this all broke down, because in that first book, they kept switching around the numbers and I didn't know what it meant. This is a division, like about 14,000 soldiers, and it was broken into 3 regiments. Well, my dad's regiment, to be honest, and I've never said this to anyone, but it was kind of the underdog. And sometimes I think they called it a bastard regiment, because the 35th was made of 3 different regiments, but one of them got sent to the Aleutian Islands. So they had to create a new one. And the new one that they created was the 320th, and it was made up of people from all different units. And it just seems like whenever I read, they divide the 320th up more frequently and attach them to this group and this group. Their history is just not as well known. Okay, then a regiment breaks down into battalion. Dad was in the 1st. A battalion breaks down into a rifle company, another. My dad thought that they were in the worst position, but the heavy weapons was either right behind them or embedded within them. So Dad's casualty rate was pretty close to 400% for the rifle guys. That meant that in 10 months of combat, they replaced everyone 4 times, not because they died though. They could be missing in action, they could be hurt, but 4 times in 10 months. And my dad's heavy weapons, it's pretty close to that, because they were either embedded within the rifle guys, riflemen, or right behind them. And then Robert Phillips was my friend in Georgia, and he was in the first platoon, and he said, I'm quite certain your dad had to be in the 2nd. And he knew, they knew some of the same people, but they didn't really know each other. And then a mortar platoon is a little farther back. That's shooting from a distance. But anyway, I just thought I'd show you that, because that is one of the things. I am glad that there's a little bit more of a history of the 320th.
Thank you. And that was very helpful in your book for me, because my dad also was in World War II under Patton. And I still don't really understand.
No, and Patton was in charge of like 400,000 guys.
Yeah.
So there were more divisions. So we had 14,000 in the 35th, but there'd be a lot of, and there'd be tanks. Not Hitler. Patton loved tanks.
Did he?
Yeah, he loved them. And he would say, I can get more men, I can't get more tanks, which I thought would be kind of an insult to my dad. It's kind of like saying, well, you lose some men here and there. And they used to say blood and guts. No, blood and guts, Patton, but the people who were with him said, yeah, his guts and our blood, But he did respect his people. My dad respected him. My dad, he did say he felt like Patton thought it was a great honor for war. And my dad didn't feel that way. But I said to my dad the thing about he could get more tanks. He could get more men. He couldn't get more tanks. And I said that to my dad thinking it might be insulting. And he said, yeah, but when they built a bridge, he was the first one to walk over it. Kind of like he was showing his respect of his engineers and whoever.
Well, and my dad was landed in Europe in October, just in time for the Battle of the Bulge also. So
okay.
He told stories about how bitter cold it was.
Yeah, it was terrible. And some people, they just died by sleeping. If you slept, you might just die because you had to keep moving to keep something a little going.
Mm-hmm. Some history.
It didn't, I don't start to get pretty casual about this stuff, but it didn't smell as bad in the Bulge because of the temperature. So dead bodies were not decaying the same as they would have in the summer.
Does anyone else have a question?
I was going to show this one picture, and I'll take a question anytime. This is Joe Demler from Port Washington, Wisconsin. And he was captured at Villers-la-Bonneau, which I showed right underneath Bastogne. And he was captured, and then he was a prisoner of war. And this, I think he was rescued or whatever in April. And he was captured the very end of December. So January, February, March, like 3.5 months, maybe something like that. And he went down to 70 pounds.
Oh my God.
They told him that they would never publish this photo, but it was too good for getting war bonds. And his parents' neighbor saw this picture in Life magazine. There was no name on it initially. And the neighbor said, I think that could be Joe. And it was. And he lives in Port. He died just about a year ago right now. And they're naming the post office after him in Port Washington. He's beloved. Well, he's a really, I mean, you can kind of see it in him. And for the honor flight, his saying is, every day is a bonus. That's his saying. And they use it on the jackets and whatever. But at least for the one around Milwaukee, they do. There's different groups. And then okay, that's pretty much it. This is different things that happen. I kind of explain that. And this is my website, Alfred the book. And I don't know, if you think of a question, I can be contacted on there. And there's just more pictures. Some of these were in, yeah, most of those actually were in the book. But there's also photos from later in life. My daughter helped me with this website. My other daughter helped me with the book cover. Huh, it's weird. There's a photo missing. That's very strange. Oh well. But anyway,
Yeah,
if you ever, you know. So, any other questions? Like I could go on way too long.
One more comment by Diane that her uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge and experienced his tank mate burned to death. So that was a really rough battle for sure.
Okay, could you say that again?
Her uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge also and witnessed his tank mate burning to death.
Oh man.
That was a horrific battle for sure.
And it was 500,000 people up there. And they say it was a surprise, but I think it was just a surprise to the infantry and the people fighting it. They kind of knew. Patton made comments. He said it was expected. And there were 250,000 Germans gathering. And there were civilians who told us there's something that's going to happen and whatever. But it's the whole strategy of war. You kind of, if you had to pull them out, that was better. Like they came out and then they actually ran out of gas. The Germans ran out of gas. That's, we can say a lot of things about heroism or whatever, but it really was the Germans ran out of gas for their tanks.
Well, you sure have done a lot of research, and I thank you for taking the time to come here and tell us about it. It makes me want to do a little more research myself, and I think it's just wonderful how you have honored your father with this book.
Like I said, he would have been a little embarrassed about it all. And another thing, what my my son-in-law said, I was talking about something. Oh, I found the granddaughter of Frank Pellucci, whatever, and I found that granddaughter just like 2 Memorial Days ago. And I found it because my mother hadn't gotten rid of some Christmas cards, and I could look on them, and I had names and I had cities and blah, blah. And my son-in-law said to my daughter, your mom is encouraging hoarding. Because if my parents hadn't kept all these things, I wouldn't have had anything to look at. Even that envelope, I wouldn't have understand how Dad could have been a replacement. I didn't get that.
Yeah, so that's what it's all about. Genealogy research is looking at all these details and
little pieces and trying to put them together.
Detective story.
And I think if my mom had outlived my dad and if he had stayed on the farm, I don't think I would have had the opportunity to ask the questions and get anything. I don't think it would have happened. I don't know. Like I say, he didn't say much, and that is why I called it The Quiet History.
So. Well, thank you. I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Louise.
Okay, thank you.
we have a book, one copy of your book that's being added to the library catalog. So you will be able to put it on hold if you're in our area. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.